It's a Saturday, a beautiful day in the neighborhood, and we are talking about hope. But we had to talk about some suffering before we got to hope. And so that's what we've been talking about in this chapter on hope. That to be human is to be in trouble, as we saw with Job. All right, Psalm 130 is the psalm Peterson is using for this subject of hope. Help, God! The bottom has fallen out of my life. Master, hear my cry for help. Listen hard. Open your ears. Listen to my cries for mercy. If you, God, kept records on wrongdoings, who would stand a chance? As it turns out, forgiveness is your habit, and that's why you are worshipped. I pray to God, my life a prayer, and wait for what God will say and do. My life's on the line before God, my Lord, waiting and watching till morning, waiting and watching till morning. O Israel, wait and watch for God. With God's arrival comes love. With God's arrival comes generous redemption. No doubt about it, God will redeem Israel, buy back Israel from captivity to sin. The second important thing Psalm 130 does is to immerse the suffering in God. All the suffering is spoken in the form of prayer, which means that God is taken seriously as a personal and concerned being. Certain sentences in the psalm show specific knowledge of the character of God as a personal redeemer. God is personal so that we may have an intimate relation with God. God is redeemer so that we may be helped by God. There is meaning to our lives, and there is salvation for our lives. A truth summed up by Forsyth when he said, "Our very pain is a sign of God's remembrance of us, for it would be much worse if we were left in ghastly isolation." 8 times the name of God is used in the psalm. We find it as we observe how God is addressed, that God is understood as one who forgives sin, who comes to those who wait and hope for God, who is characterized by steadfast love and plenteous redemption, and who will redeem Israel. God makes a difference. God acts positively toward God's people. God is not indifferent. God is not rejecting, not ambivalent or dilatory, does not act arbitrarily in fits and starts. God is not stingy, providing only for bare survival. Karl Barth describes God in this regard. The free inclination of God to God's creature, denoted in the biblical witness by grace, takes place under the presupposition that the creature is in distress and that God's intention is to espouse God's cause and to espouse the creature's cause and to grant the creature assistance in the extremity. Because grace, the gracious love of God, consists in this inclination, it is, and therefore God is, merciful. God's very being is mercy. The mercy of God lies in God's readiness to share in sympathy the distress of another, a readiness which springs from the inmost nature of God and stamps all God's being and doing. It lies, therefore, in God's will, springing from the depths of God's nature and characterizing it to take the initiative for the removal of this distress. For the fact that God participates in it by sympathy implies that God is really present in the midst. And this means again that God wills that it should not be, that God wills, therefore, to remove it. And this, of course, is why we are able to face, acknowledge, accept, and live through suffering. We know that it can never be ultimate. It can never constitute the bottom line. God seeks the hurt, maimed, wandering, and lost. God woos the rebellious and confused. If God were different than God is, not one of us would have a leg to stand on. Quote, "If you, God, kept records on wrongdoings, who could stand a chance? As it turns out, forgiveness is your habit, and that's why you are worshipped." Because of the forgiveness, we have a place to stand. We stand in confident awe before God, not in terrorized despair. Employed to wait. Such are the two great realities of Psalm 130. Suffering is real, God is real. Suffering is a mark of our existential authenticity. God is proof of our essential and eternal humanity. We accept suffering, we believe in God. The acceptance and the belief both emerge out of those times when the bottom has fallen out of our lives. But there is more than a description of reality here. There is a procedure for participating in it. The program is given in 2 words: wait and watch. The words are at the center of the psalm. I pray to God, my life a prayer, and wait for what God will say and do. My life's on the line before God, my Lord, waiting and watching till morning. Waiting and watching till morning. Wait and watch. Add up to hope. The words wait and hope are connected with the image of watchmen waiting through their night for the dawn. The connection provides important insights for the person in trouble who cries out, "But surely there is something for me to do." The answer is yes, there is something for you to do. Or more exactly, there is someone you can be. Be a watchman, or be a watch person. A watchman is an important person, but he doesn't do very much. The massive turning of the earth, the immense energies released by the sun, all that goes on apart from this watch person. He does nothing to influence or control such things. He is a watchman. He knows the dawn is coming. There are no doubts concerning that. Meanwhile, he is alert to dangers. He comforts restless children or animals until it is time to work or play again in the light of day. I once was a watchman, says Eugene Peterson. I worked from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. in a building in New York City. My work as a night watchman was combined with that of elevator operator, but the elevator work petered out about midnight. And after that, I sat and read, dozed, or studied. There were assorted night people in the neighborhood who would stop in through the night hours and visit with me. Strange, bizarre people with wonderful stories. I will never know how much of what I heard from them was fact and how much was fiction. A failed millionaire obsessed with communist plots responsible for his decline. A South American adventurer now too old to tramp the remote jungles and mountains. A couple of streetwalkers who on slow nights would sit and talk about God and the worth of their souls. I did that for an entire year. I stayed awake, I studied, I learned. I visited and gossiped, and I waited for the dawn. Dawn always came. The people who employed me thought it was worth several dollars an hour for me to wait through the night and watch for the morning. But I never did anything, never constructed anything, never made anything happen. I waited and watched. I hoped. If I had not known that there were others in charge of the building, I might not have been content to just be a watchman and collect my pay. If I were not confident that the building had an owner who cared about it, if I did not know that there was a building engineer who kept it in good order and repair, if I did not know that there were hundreds of people in the building who were going about their work every day quite capably, if I had not known these things, I might not have been so relaxed in making idle gossip with women of the night and old men of storied pasts. Nor would the psalmist have been content to be a watchman if he were not sure of God. The psalmists and the Christians waiting and watching, that is, hoping, is based on the conviction that God is actively involved in God's creation and vigorously at work in redemption. Hoping does not mean doing nothing. It is not fatalistic resignation. It means going about our assigned tasks, confident that God will provide the meaning and the conclusions. It is not compelled to work away at keeping up appearances with a bogus spirituality. It is the opposite of desperate and panicky manipulations, of scurrying and worrying. And hoping is not dreaming. It is not spinning an illusion or fantasy to protect us from our boredom or our pain. It means a confident, alert expectation that God will do what God said God will do. It is imagination put in the harness of faith. It is a willingness to let God do it God's way and in God's time. It is the opposite of making plans that we demand that God put into effect, telling God both how and when to do it. That is not hoping in God, but bullying God. I pray to God, my life a prayer, and wait for what God will say and do. My life's on the line before God, my Lord, waiting and watching till morning, waiting and watching till morning. An eye specialist and a painter. When we suffer, we attract counselors as money attracts thieves. Everybody has an idea of what we did wrong to get ourselves into such trouble and a prescription for what we can do to get out of it. We are flooded first with sympathy and then with advice, and when we don't come around quickly, we are abandoned as a hopeless case. But none of that is what we need. We need hope. We need to know that we are in relation to God. We need to know that suffering is part of what it means to be human and not something alien. We need to know where we are and where God is. We need an eye specialist rather than, say, a painter. A painter tries to convey to us with the aid of his brush, or her brush, and a palette and picture of the world as she sees it. An ophthalmologist tries to enable us to see the world as it really is. In George MacDonald's novel, The Princess and Curdie, when Curdie reaches the castle, he sees the great staircase and knows that to reach the tower, he must go farther. The narrator takes the occasion to note that those who work well in the depths more easily understand the heights, for indeed in their true nature, they are one and the same. For in the person who suffers, has suffered, or will suffer, Psalm 130 is essential equipment, for it convinces us that the big difference is not in what people suffer, but in the way they suffer. The same shaking that makes fetid water stink makes perfume issue a more pleasant odor. That's interesting. The psalm does not exhort us to put up with suffering. It does not explain it or explain it away. It is rather a powerful demonstration that our place in the depths is not out of bounds from God. We see that whatever or whoever got us in trouble cannot separate us from God, for forgiveness is God's habit. We are persuaded that God's way with us is redemption, and that the redemption, not the suffering, is ultimate. The bottom has a bottom. The heights are boundless. Knowing that, we are helped to go ahead and learn the skills of waiting and watching, hoping, by which God has given room to work out our salvation and develop our faith while we fix our attention on God's ways of grace and resurrection.